Most people think maturity is a gift. They praise the child who's wise beyond their years. They admire the teenager who acts like an adult. They respect the young person who never causes problems. But what they don't see is what it cost. Because people who matured too early didn't grow up faster by choice. They grew up because they had to. And that changes the brain, the personality, the way they love, the way they trust, the way they survive. Today, we're exploring the psychology of people who matured too early and why their calm hides a story most people will never understand. Early maturity is not a talent, it's a response. Children aren't meant to be emotionally strong. They're meant to be curious, messy, protected, safe enough to be careless. So when a child becomes serious, observant, and emotionally controlled too early, something happened. Maybe they grew up around emotional chaos. Maybe they had to be the strong one. Maybe no one showed up when they needed comfort. Or maybe they learned early that emotions weren't safe to express. So they adapted. They learned to read moods, to predict conflict, to stay quiet, to stay useful, to stay invisible. Early maturity isn't wisdom, it's vigilance. It's the mind saying, if I don't grow up now, no one will protect me. They learned self-control before self-expression. Most people learn how to express themselves before learning how to control themselves. People who matured too early, they learned control first. They learned to swallow emotions, to stay composed under pressure, to think before reacting, always. They don't explode. They don't panic easily. They don't ask for much. But here's the cost. They struggle to let go. They overthink joy. They feel guilty relaxing. They feel unsafe being carefree. Fun doesn't come naturally because surrender requires surrender, and surrender was never an option. They feel older than their age and younger than their healing. People who matured too early often feel out of sync with the world, too serious for their peers when they were young, too emotionally tired when they're older. They skipped a stage, and the body remembers. They might crave rest, silence, and solitude, not because they're antisocial, but because their nervous system has been on duty for too long. They carry emotional age beyond their years, but inside, there's often an unacknowledged child still waiting to feel safe. They became independent before they felt secure. Independence is praised, but forced independence is different. People who matured too early learned not to rely on anyone, not because they didn't want connection, but because relying on others led to disappointment. So they learned to do everything themselves. Handle problems alone, process emotions privately, carry responsibilities quietly. They don't ask for help, even when they're drowning, not because they're proud, but because asking once taught them it wasn't coming. They are emotionally intelligent, but emotionally guarded. These people can read a room instantly. They sense tension before words are spoken. They understand motivations. They catch subtle shifts in tone, posture, and silence. That's emotional intelligence, but it came from survival. They had to know when it was safe, when to speak, when to disappear. So while they understand emotions deeply, they hesitate to reveal their own. Vulnerability feels dangerous. Depending on someone feels risky. Trust feels conditional. Not because they don't want intimacy, but because intimacy once came with consequences. They struggle with softness. Softness feels unfamiliar. Being taken care of feels awkward. Receiving affection feels suspicious. Rest feels undeserved. They're more comfortable being the strong one, the reliable one, the emotionally steady one, because that role kept them safe. But deep down, many of them crave what they never had, without knowing how to receive it. They don't need saving, they need permission to rest. They mistake hyper-responsibility for strength. People who mature too early often carry responsibility that isn't theirs. They feel responsible for others' emotions, for keeping peace, for fixing problems that aren't theirs to solve. They confuse self-sacrifice with maturity. But true maturity includes boundaries, and learning boundaries later in life feels uncomfortable because they were trained to overextend, not protect themselves. The healing starts when they redefine maturity. Real healing begins when they realize maturity doesn't mean emotional suppression, strength doesn't mean constant control, independence doesn't mean isolation. It means balance. It means learning to play without guilt, to rest without explaining, to feel deeply without shame. It means letting the inner child finally breathe without apologizing for it. If you matured too early, there's nothing broken about you. You adapted, you survived, you became strong before you were ready. But survival isn't the final destination. You're allowed to slow down now. You're allowed to be soft. You're allowed to feel without managing everything. Because the strongest people aren't the ones who grew up too fast. They're the ones who learn how to live fully after. And that is the real sign of maturity.